Am I good enough? That is one of the most important questions in every man's life, and unfortunately, most don't feel that they can honestly answer yes. Today we are joined by Manuel Bolley to discuss the source of and strategy for fixing a feeling of inadequacy, the proper use of comparison, practical steps for beginning your journey of self-discovery and self-improvement, who you need to be to get the right woman, and much more. I'm your host, Gabriel Schickler, and this is the Operation Paragon podcast. A quick note before we begin, I want to say thank you to those of you who have left 5-star reviews for the show. It does a lot more than you'd think in helping us get the message out and impact more lives, and I really appreciate it. Also, I'm painfully aware that I have been more or less totally inactive the past few months. Long story short, I went into a season of doubt and really defensive reactionary action, and it took me some time to get things back on track, but I also learned quite a lot along the way, so I'm really excited to share that with you guys and hopefully help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made. I'll detail more of this in an upcoming episode, but for now, let's dive into things with Manuel. This was recorded several months ago, so the aesthetic of his page has changed slightly from what I reference in this episode, but the message remains the same, and I really love today's conversation because we went really deep and we discussed a lot of extremely practical, actionable things that you can do to vastly improve your life. So enjoy. Awesome. So just to get people caught up with your brand, of course, you are Holistic Manhood on Instagram. You do a lot of coaching, training, and putting out a lot of content that just helps men get their minds right, examine their lives a little bit deeper, and then make those improvements that they recognize to the things that need to happen. So to get us started out, I'm just really curious to hear a little bit more about what got you started in, doing this work in the first place, and then what that journey has really looked like for you in, building up to where you are now.
All right. So first of all, I appreciate you for inviting me in. So as Gabriel said, I do hope I pronounced his name correctly. Gabriel. How is it pronounced
Gabriel.
in English? Gabriel, okay.
Yeah.
As Gabriel said, I do run the brand Holistic Manhood. My name is Manuel Bolley, and I'm a 25 years old men's coach and author. If I would tell you everything about my journey, we would probably have a podcast episode on its own. So I'm trying to make it as short as possible. But it started all with my first breakup, which got me into the dating niche, essentially. And it got me into the red pill and more pickup artist stuff, because I'm in this industry since like over 7 years. This is when my self-improvement journey actually started, and I got into the dating niche and red pill and pickup artistry and all that stuff. And I actually started out as a coach in that area myself, but just as my own development progressed, I simply got more onto traditional masculinity. I found my faith in God, which has also been a process on its own. I've been an atheist and I've been into the new age, and now finally I follow God. So I'd say just through my own development, I went more from an atheist pickup artist to now a traditional masculine ambassador, you could say.
Amazing, man. Yeah. And it's really interesting. So you recently had that kind of a rebrand or a reset that you did with your page. Can you give us any as much insight as you want into the rationale behind that, and then what things are looking like for the brand going forward?
Which rebrand are you talking about?
Well, you had that one post where you said, you've been gone for a while, you've taken a lot of time off of Instagram and social media, and then you were just kind of getting back into it. Now obviously, like, I don't have screenshots of what your page looked like before this, but I did follow you, significantly before that post. So did you archive a bunch of posts, or what did that look like?
Okay, now I know what you're talking about. So it wasn't really a rebrand. It was just, first of all, let's go into it, why I deleted everything. It's just because I do believe in death and rebirth, not just talking from a physical perspective, but from a psychological perspective, because the old self dies and the new self is reborn. And I do see this as a symbolism, and that's why I decided, okay, I'll delete everything and I'll start new, just to symbolize, okay, this is something new. But the reason was not a rebrand or anything like that. And the reason for my break wasn't because I rebranded or anything like that. It was just simply because I had to focus on my personal life, because I had a lot of shit going on. I was renovating my apartment so I can rent it, because now I have my first apartment rented. I do have my marriage more planned now, because like I'm engaged since 1 year. I'm in a relationship since 2 years, and it kind of got
Congratulations.
onto a halt. Thank you very much, because I just pursued my entrepreneurship, and you know how time consuming that is. So I had to take a step back and make a little bit more time and really focus on that. Also focus on my faith, find a church to get prepared for marriage and all that type of stuff. And I also just used the time a little bit to get more structure in. And this is actually something that I, just before we hopped on this call, I posted the first post in a new account where I focus a little bit more on sales, because my bottleneck hasn't been lack of knowledge or anything, but lack of structure in sales. You know, that this is what I see men's coach often do, because it is so, you have so many things that you have to take care of, right? As a men's coach, first of all, define what a men's coach is, right? It's that's already difficult, because it's so much that goes in there. And because you're caught up in all the education and your own work, you don't really have time to create a good sales structure. And this is what I did in my break. So I took a step back and said, okay, my business isn't running how I want it to work, so I have to do something. My bottleneck isn't the knowledge that I have. My bottleneck is my lack in sales skills, or the lack of structure.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so one of the things that you mentioned in that, first, like, I'm back post, is you said that your mission and your focus right now is to help, entrepreneurs heal deep feelings of inadequacy and to get married to the love of their life. Obviously, I want to dive a lot into both parts of that. The first thing that I thought was really interesting is you didn't just generally say, kind of developing your sense of self or anything more broad. You specifically said helping men to deal with, feeling unworthy or inadequate or not enough. And I mean, I've had a lot of experience with this in my own life, as I'm sure you have had at different points too. So from your experience, running the page, the coaching you do, why is it that so many men have this deep-rooted sense of not being enough or not measuring up? And do you think that it's more common today than it used to be, or has it always been this way?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely more common than it used to be. There are many things that go in there. First of all, we do live in a society that is simply high pressure. Everything is moving extremely fast with social media and all that stuff. The problem is, I know how it is for myself. You're, let's say you're a young guy, you're 16, 17, 18, you're on Instagram, you see all those apparent millionaires with 20, 21, 22. So the bar is ridiculously high nowadays. Like, what you think is normal, or what you think should be the case, is actually an exception. But because you're bombarded with it on social media, it finds its way into you. And then you think, like, you're looking at all those people on social media, they're all successful, they're all driving Bugattis, they're on yachts, and they're just like 22, right? And you're sitting there thinking, what the fuck am I doing wrong? This is one thing that goes in there. And the other thing, there are two other things. One thing is, primarily, especially in this niche, there is a lot of shame involved. In this shame, in this niche, like in the dating and red pill niche, people use shame as a mechanism to drive the men into purchasing their services or products. You can see this. I don't want to talk bad about Andrew Tate, because he has a lot of positive things, but he does work with this shame mechanism. Like, he's talking in a specific way to those young men to get them purchase their products. Which, like, his products, I'm being honest, I'm using it myself, like the real world, it has great value. But the way how he gets many of them in there, yeah, it does, is not the best way, right? So this is something that you will see with many, many coaches or brands or content creators. And it's not just like in the money-making niche, it's also in the dating niche with virginity and all that stuff. It's being put down so people buy their product to, let's say, lose their virginity or something like that. And the other thing is, of course, also personal experience. For example, in my case, I know why I used to struggle with the feelings of inadequacy, and I know what actually initially got me into pursuing entrepreneurship. And that is simply because this is when I got the attention, the validation, and the affection from my parents. right? So when you perform in school, your
Mm.
parents are proud of you. When you're bad in school, your parents are not proud of you, right? So when you perform very, very good, you're getting that praise, you're getting the affection, you're getting that what you want as a child. And that, of course,
Yeah.
follows you into adulthood. And when you don't work on that, you will then feel worthless if you don't do anything. Let's say a lot of guys have difficulties just doing nothing, right? Just sitting there doing nothing, enjoying a little bit of off time, because then those
Hmm.
feelings of inadequacy arise. And that is part of the childhood.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said a lot of really interesting things there. One thing that I want to dive a little bit deeper on before we go any further here is specifically the use of comparison and shame, because those are very closely linked, but they're not quite the same thing. And I think that I mean, personally, I believe that in certain contexts, they are definitely appropriate because, any group, if we take, comparison at first, if you are going to be, trying to make something of yourself, you don't have any external point of reference, right? So like for example, if and like I'm not a big fan of running, but let's say, I did track in high school because that's a really easy example. If I, do a 400-meter dash in a certain amount of time and then I do it in a shorter time next week, I can say that I improved over my past self, but I don't know objectively how significant that is. Like I have no idea if uh, a 5 or 6 minute mile is a good thing until you have that point of comparison where you see there are people running 4 minute miles, and then you say, oh, okay, I'm not that good. So I think for the sake of getting that perspective, comparison is very good. It can just become unhealthy when it's like the source of validation, if you will. And then with shame, I think, and I had a very similar experience. My parents are very proud of me and my other siblings when we do well academically, and they want us to succeed and push hard and everything. And especially in college, when I started questioning like what the point of all this was, I definitely got some pushback there, so I can totally relate to that. But I do think that shame has a proper role in enforcing standards that any group of people has, like whether or not they're just running out in front of you and trying to tear you down in front of other people, or you just like, I mean, I've had this experience in my own life too, where I've done something that's not in integrity with who I want to be, and my friends know that I'm like, quitting video games is a good example. I had this time period where I was just like bouncing back and forth. Like I would delete a game and then re-download it 3 days later and play it for a little bit and then say this is dumb and delete it. And so my friends knew that I was, um, dealing with that. But having somebody external to yourself that can just objectively see that you're not living up to who you've said you want to be, I think is a very beneficial thing. So that was a very long-winded explanation, I guess. But can you break down, and maybe you completely disagree with me, but is there a time and place for comparison or shame to be appropriately used, or is it just a blanket, don't touch it?
Comparison, yes. Shame, I'm not so sure. I'm going to get
Mm.
into shame in just a minute. Let me begin with the
Mm-hmm.
comparison. When, like, comparison isn't bad per se. It is bad when you start envying the person, when you're jealous of
Mm-hmm.
them, when you're envying them that they have something that you don't have. I compare myself to other people constantly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be improving myself. I take the best people
Mm-hmm.
who I know and imitate them. That's comparing myself to them. I'm looking between, okay, what is the competence gap between me and where I want to get? Hence the
Mm-hmm.
person who's already there. And I can only close that competence gap when I actually compare myself, analyze, okay, what am I missing? And then I can get there, right? So comparison is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely valid, but it has to serve as a source of inspiration and not to pull you down and to demotivate you. And it's difficult,
Mm-hmm.
like it's a double-edged sword a little bit, because obviously when you compare yourself, you can potentially then envy that person. I know that
Mm-hmm.
this is something that is hard for me as well, like to stay rational in it, and to, when I notice, okay, I'm starting a little bit, I'm working so hard and I'm not there yet, and it's still so much work. You have to have the
Mm-hmm.
power and stop yourself and tell yourself, okay, look, I'm comparing my level whatever that is, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to their level 100, 110, and whatever. I'm comparing myself, who has, let's say, 2, 3 years of experience, to somebody who has 12, 14, 15 years of experience. Well, obviously, they're going to be 10 times better than you. Right? This is funny because I actually just had that example today, because I'm constantly, especially right now, I'm very focusing on improving my, not so much the competence of coaching, but rather just my sales competence. So the entire framework, the sales framework around it. And I've been looking at all those other people and I'm thinking to myself, holy shit, if I want to do everything that they have right now, that alone needs me like 2 years just to have that sales framework set up. And that's okay, because again, they are in that game for so much longer, right? So it shouldn't demotivate you. It should inspire you to pursue something bigger. And about the shame, you often hear, and I potentially even said it myself, that shame needs to be there to ensure a functional society, but I'm not sure how I feel about that anymore, because especially when you think about it from a sales perspective, let's just talk about the sales perspective. You want to sell something to a potential client. Let's say he's overweight. Yes, you can say, hey, listen, you fat fuck, you have to lose weight. I'm not sure if that's the best approach. Or you can ask him questions and actually lead him, right? Okay, how does your current body impact you physically and mentally? How does it impact you? Maybe he has children. How does it impact your life if you cannot really hold up with your children and give them everything that you could, right? So this is leadership. And I am convinced, and I do believe you're on my side, that this is the more effective strategy to get someone to do something that is right. And that is why I think, okay, shame, I don't know. I prefer leadership, honestly.
No, that's a very good point, because as I was thinking about this, the difference between the shame that I was talking about and then, like the interaction with my friends, living up to who I want to be and everything like that, is that's more just accountability, like having a standard and knowing when you've dropped, when you're sticking to it or when you've dropped below it, and like you're doing something that's objectively unacceptable to you and other people know it. The shame part, it was really good that you kind of got me thinking on these lines. Shame implies a type of condemnation. I think there's a big difference between guilt and shame. Because if you feel like, if you're supposed to be on a diet, and you have a cheat meal, you slack off, you don't work out for a day, you're going to feel guilty about that because your conscience is saying, hey, what's up? We said we were going to do something different. What's going on now? But then the shame component is if you say, oh, I screwed up, I'm no good, I can't do this, and you start that kind of negative self-talk. So that was really good what you said, and I do definitely appreciate that. So to tie this back specifically to the, feeling of inadequacy, do you think that comes, from comparison alone, or is there any other factor that's involved in kind of like the source of that?
The source of feelings of inadequacy, they're multifold. Is that the right word in English? Is that even a word in English? I'm not sure, but I do believe you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yes.
There are multiple ways, let's put it that way. And the thing is about the feelings of inadequacy, if there would be a one-size-fits-all solution, that would be too easy. We have feelings of inadequacy for so many reasons. But what I have noticed, it's not so much about comparison, especially in my context. If I focus on entrepreneurs who are already successful in their lives and still struggle with those feelings of inadequacy, it's not so much about the comparison part, but rather because it stems from the childhood and they do believe they have to perform, otherwise they are worthless. So they're taking their self-worth not from internal, but from external.
Gotcha. Okay. And if somebody is listening to this right now and they're saying to themselves, well, that's ridiculous. Of course, what I do is valuable. How do you respond to that? Because I've had a very similar experience before, but this was a very alien concept to me the first time a mentor introduced it, not finding your self-worth in what you do. So how do you frame that?
Yeah, obviously it's valuable, but just because it's valuable, it doesn't determine your worth. There is a fundamental difference between what you do and what you are. Like
Mm-hmm.
the work that I do is valuable as well. But let's, for example, if you say, okay, the work that you do is valuable and that is why it determines your self-worth. What if for whatever reason your business failed? What if you get into some crisis, you lose staff, you have to close your business? Now that was so valuable is gone. Does that mean you don't have any value anymore? Because if so, you do have a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so one of the things that naturally develops from, this line of reasoning, and something that I personally am very careful of, is, not living in that place of scarcity and lack and, hating yourself or anything like that, but also keeping your edge and your drive. Because one of the things that I think is very dangerous about the conventional modern take on therapy, specifically for men, is we treat men like women and we assume that the same inputs are going to work. And you might get to a place where you're comfortable and you feel like you're more at peace as a man. But I feel like a necessary part of that, and I've experienced this a little bit in my own life too, is that it takes away some of your fire, because you're convinced that you're perfect the way you are, you're fine in your situation, and then that kills some of the desire to push to that next level and keep building yourself. So how do you balance those two things with feeling like you are enough and you are worthy in these different things, but also keeping the drive and the zeal to keep moving forward?
It's a matter of the teaching. As you said, perfectly said it, and something that I always criticize as well. It's the new agey feminine approach of things. The I
Mm-hmm.
am a goddess, I am perfect the way I am. And this also has now affected men, right? Which is,
Mm-hmm.
it is good to some extent, right? Self-love, self-acceptance is needed, but not the way it is taught,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're perfect the way you are, and love yourself. You should love yourself unconditionally, but that doesn't mean that you constantly pursue something bigger, that you constantly improve yourself. Like being like accepting yourself and loving yourself, unconditionally loving yourself, don't contradict in working on improving yourself. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
matter of the teaching. If I teach men now, okay, you're perfect the way you are, you don't have to improve yourself, you can't just watch porn all day long and eat Cheetos and play video games. Yes, eventually they will feel comfortable with that. Maybe they will. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
adopt it because at some point they will get into some sort of crisis and then they will start feeling all those types of negative feelings again. But maybe it works
Mm-hmm.
temporarily, but it's not the real solution. So it's a matter of the teaching. It's a matter of, okay, how do we guide him? I have to work on his self-esteem. I have to infuse him with this, with that self-belief, with that abundance mindset. But I have to yet get him to pursue something bigger.
Mm. And so that's looking more for like a cause and a purpose that's beyond himself.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Awesome. And so you shared, you started as an atheist, eventually progressed to believing in God. How important do you believe that your faith is to having that sense of adequacy or being enough? It's a profound source of peace for me. But I'm wondering for you personally, how has that had an impact on your how you view yourself?
I must say, while I'm very sure that God's healing power is infinite and there has been a lot of character transformation through God, it
Mm-hmm.
didn't necessarily have anything to do with my feelings of inadequacy, because I already felt enough before I got really, really grounded in my belief in God. So
Hmm.
it's not like, if men struggle with it, yes, using God, using the Holy Spirit to fill that inner void definitely works. But I got there myself even before I believed in God. So it's hard to say.
Interesting. Yeah. How did you do that, if you don't mind me asking?
A lot of inner work, like really a lot of
Hmm.
inner work. I'm very, very, very introspective. I always have been. And that is why I constantly analyze, I constantly improve, I constantly focus my attention inward. I'm also an introvert, so I'm not so
Mm-hmm.
much going out. I'd rather just be alone. I do read a lot. Like I read two books around per month. So I got there by just a lot of focusing my attention inwards and
Mm.
analyzing the root cause of that feelings of inadequacy, healing my childhood trauma, and all that type of stuff. But, I have to say it took me like 5 years to get there.
Mm. Gotcha. Yeah. And it definitely is the work of a lifetime. One of the things that's been very, I suppose, a sobering thought for me recently is realizing that, I mean, both of us are just at the beginning of our lives. And so it's not like we're going to have all the wisdom in the world and we're going to know everything about how we want our lives to go and all this anytime soon. Like I actually was just having this conversation last night with a friend. I said, I could live, my entire lifetime over again, maybe even 2 lifetimes over again before I really have, that sense of peace and understanding, assuming I get that in this life at all. Um, and so, just having that perspective, being willing to be patient with yourself and take the lessons that you get along the way. And like you were saying earlier with the comparison thing, not comparing your, level 2 or level 3 to someone's level, 800 or wherever they happen to be. So that's a very profound point. And so if somebody's listening to this, they're at the start of their journey, they know they have some, limiting beliefs, self-doubt, things they want to work through, but it seems really overwhelming to them. They don't know where to start. What is your framework or process or recommendation for just getting used to doing that self-analysis that you were talking about and, starting to have this introspection and learning more about yourself? What does that look like for you?
What I'm doing with every single one of my clients is 12 minutes in solitude every single day. And that right before you go to bed. Because only when you allow for that quiet space can things from your unconsciousness actually rise up. The problem with the vast majority of people out there in general, not just men, they're constantly distracted. We have a busy life. Like, I'm in a big city. I'm from Vienna. Like, life is super fast in there. I wake up at 3 a.m. I start working immediately when I wake up. I go to the gym before I go to work. Then I go to work. Then I work 10 hours. Then I go home. Then I have a fiance waiting on me. Then I spend time with her. So super, super, super busy. And that is true for pretty much everyone, especially in modern times where people sometimes have to work 2 jobs in order just to live, just to afford life, in big cities at least. So they're constantly busy. And because you're constantly busy, and the time when they're not busy, they distract themselves with their smartphones or whatever else they do. Nothing can ever happen, because things only happen when you allow for the space. Like the solitude, I like to explain that way. When you spend time in solitude, you allow the spiritual realm to unfold, which is also interlinked with the unconsciousness. Because when you're constantly busy, constantly distracted, you're just grounded in the physical reality. You're just reduced to your animalistic nature, and you don't get to do and experience anything else. So what everybody has to do is spend time in solitude, 12 minutes. I'm using that number on purpose because 10 minutes is too short, and 15 minutes people will be like, oh, that's too long. That's why I said 12 minutes. That's the sweet spot for it. So 12 minutes every day before you go to bed. Why before you go to bed? Because the stress is away. You don't have to think about anything else. It's 12 minutes before bed. You don't need to be on your phone. You're like 12 minutes before bed. You don't do anything productive. No chance. So you use that time and do something productive. And when you do that, all sort of thoughts will arise. For many of the guys, it will be things like, okay, I'm bored, or they want to start checking their phone again, or maybe they think, okay, I shouldn't be doing this. This is useless. I sit there and do nothing. And you want to start taking notes of those things, because it's not just
physically,
that
like
will
writing
arise.
them down.
Yeah, physical. Taking notes with a notebook, a pen and paper, phone, whatever. I prefer pen and paper because, again, then you have the phone in your hands. It's a little bit of a distraction.
And you don't have the distraction. Not to mention the blue light right before bed is not good for you either.
Exactly. And when you constantly do that, you will be surprised what you will find out about yourself. Because when you actually listen to your internal voice, there's so much that you can learn about yourself.
But it's really a matter of having the courage to just sit there and let yourself talk. One of the things that I have a big complaint with in the modern world. Specifically, you look at things like the American, pharmaceutical industry, but more than just medical stuff, pretty much across every area of life, we've gotten very good at ignoring or lessening the impact of symptoms of problems so that we can ignore them, but we never actually solve the root cause. So it's like, instead of it, if you have a gaping wound, we all know it's going to be more effective to actually, stitch up the wound than just take painkillers, because it's still there, it's still killing you. But a lot of people aren't willing to sit with that. And for the listener, like, as he's saying, this is something you have to do over time to build up that competence. Like, the first few times you do it, you're probably not going to get a whole lot out of it. You're going to keep getting distracted, and your mind's going to wander. Like you said, you're going to be bored. But then once you build up that habit and start getting used to sitting alone with yourself, it's going to become more comfortable because it's familiar. And by that point, you'll probably also have, been brought face to face with things about yourself that you don't like and things that you should work on. And then if you don't just, beat up on yourself and feel bad, but you actually take action on it, then that will start to iterate and improve over time. And in keeping with the, what you're saying about the noise and the distraction, have you ever read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis?
Never even heard of it.
Okay.
What's that about?
Yeah, I have it on my shelf right here. So C.S. Lewis, I'm a Catholic. He is not a Catholic. He was a high church Anglican, I believe, but absolutely brilliant theologian. So he was a writer around the time of World War II, things like that. He wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, and then he also has a lot of other, just more philosophically based books, if you will. So he has a ton of really good stuff, and it's really interesting reading what he wrote now, because a lot of it was very prophetic in predicting the world that we've gotten to today, and he was spot on with a lot of things. But the Screw Tape Letters is a very interesting story where he takes it's a series of letters from the uncle Screwtape, who's like an archdemon in hell, and then his nephew Wormwood, who is a tempter that's on Earth that is trying to get this this human to fall into sin and to just avoid going to heaven, basically. And it's very interesting because it's all written from the point of view of the uncle. My dearest Wormwood, you should be doing this, you should not be doing that. And it's just fascinating to kind of get that perspective. But he also does a very good breakdown of the process of how things like temptation work and all this. And one of the things that he stresses really early on, and they call the human that they're trying to tempt to question, the patient. They say the patient should never be aware of your existence. You just need to keep him so busy and so occupied with all the things in his life that he never has the time to slow down and examine things and figure out what's actually going on in his life. Like, he needs to be caught up in the noise. And obviously when he was writing this, it was I don't know the exact date of publication, but it was sometime between like 1930 and 1960. So we don't have social media. You don't have even something like a radio was a really big box that you had in your house at the time. So there was a lot less distraction, but you still had the newspapers and all these different things, and there were still a lot of things to grab people's attention. And now that you can, in your phone, you can carry the entire world with you wherever you go. It's so important, like you're saying, to not just be like, oh yeah, I'll do that when it happens, but to actually deliberately set aside time for it to do that and to really get for that. In keeping with what you were saying about just that feeling of worthiness, being good with yourself, having a healthy relationship with yourself, if you want to think about it in those terms. One of the things that I heard this guy named Ed Milet say recently was that good people don't take more than they believe that they deserve. So that if you're putting your best foot forward, you're trying to have a good impact on the world, you need to believe that you deserve good things, because like if you're genuinely a good person, you're trying to help people, you're going to say, oh, like that's not just, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't go after, like in sales, right? I shouldn't go after that commission. I'm not, let's say, worthy of a good girlfriend or a good relationship with my parents or something like that. So how would you recommend people start to change their perspective so that they're not necessarily like demanding things of life or trying to force things, but also being willing to, recognize the things that they have done well, and to really, dwell on that more than the opposite, if that makes sense.
I mean, if I understood what you just said correctly, what you're more describing are people that have difficulties with taking what they deserve. Did I get this correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
Okay.
they don't believe they deserve it because of some feeling of unworthiness.
Okay. Well, in that case, then they have to learn to demand it, not just, actually just to demand it. The problem with those people is, and I've dealt with this myself so much, I've
Mm-hmm.
undersold myself for so long, because even though I was so competent in many fields, not just now my own professional business, but also just in my corporate life, I was undersold myself because I thought, okay, I wasn't worthy enough for it. But
Mm-hmm.
what helped me to close the gap, like there's a gap, you have people who think they don't deserve it, and then you have people who think they deserve anything, right? And you don't really want to
Yeah.
be any of those. You want to be somewhere in the middle. And
Mm-hmm.
I've heard this sentence one time, that they're like something along those lines, that there are people who think they don't deserve that, which is why they don't take it. And there are people who just think they deserve anything and take anything they want, even they don't deserve it. And
Mm-hmm.
what always helped me, again, which also goes a little back to comparison, I compare myself to those people. I analyzed it once again, taking a step back and thinking to myself, okay, why can't I take this and they can? Well, because they don't care. And they don't care because they have a bad moral character. I do have a good moral character. So therefore, if I take it, it's not necessarily unjustified. And I know if it's unjustified. And if it's unjustified, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to take it. And I also know that it's justified that, for example, that I go and get that income raise because I deserve it. So it's that
Mm.
change of perspective and understanding that there are people out there who just take anything that they want. And you can apply this principle to anything, like using comparison practically for you. This also helped me, for example, with the confidence. What
Mm-hmm.
differentiates you from being insecure from someone who's super confident? He just is. Some people are unaware and they just are confident. So you can't just imitate it until you become it.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Um, and so one of the other things that you've spoken about, I was reading recently in a post that you did, and a lot of stuff that your page is based around, is the idea of maintaining a frame as a man. And so, like you're saying, some people have a confident frame, some people have a weak frame, some people have a frame that they're not really even consciously aware of. So my first question is just, can you explain to us why a frame matters and why it's something that you should focus on in the first place? And then how one can go about, building up that side of themselves and presenting themselves better, both to themselves and to the world.
I do believe we should start describing what frame is, because I do believe not everybody knows what frame is. So just let me quickly catch up on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of
Frame
course.
essentially is the way how you carry yourself. So when you say to a man, okay, he has strong frame, that means he has certain traits like emotional control, self-composure, confidence, charisma. And when you said he
Mm-hmm.
has a weak frame, he is insecure, socially incompetent, anxious, and so on. And you notice that in their way of behavior and their body language,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how you can improve that is to become aware of it and then once again change it. I'm giving you an example because I once was extremely socially anxious, so socially anxious
Mm-hmm.
that I disassociated when I spoke to strangers. Like 7 years ago, I couldn't make this interview, no chance, because I would be out of my mind completely.
Mm-hmm.
And what got me there is, first of all, facing your fears. I was socially anxious. That means I had to go out there and go talk to people. I was socially inept. That means I had to improve my social competence, which means I had to learn how to speak, which means I had to learn how to set boundaries, how to present myself in the right way. I had to learn how to have the right body language. So be aware of your body language, because the body is always communicating. And this is actually something I'd give people as a tip to focus on as the first thing in a social interaction, to focus on your body language. What are you doing? Like, most people are so unaware of their body language. They do anything. For example, they sit like this because they're uncomfortable. Other people
For the
sit like
listeners,
this.
he's folding his hands for that, steepling his fingers. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Isn't also I thought it's probably also going to be on Spotify. Yeah, correctly. So there are people who cramp their hands together, and there are people who have, it's called power poses, and those are differences. And it's not just with the hands, it's with your entire body that tells you if somebody is comfortable or not. And if you are unaware of that, it's good to focus on your own body language, not just because it is what you communicate, because you will actually, when you become aware of the body, you will become aware of the emotions of the mind. Because let's say you're in I like to use job interview as an example, because this used to be something that I also struggled with. I used to be very uncomfortable. And what did I do? I clinched, is that the right word, around the chair? Is it the right word? Clinched?
Yes.
Not sure. Yeah, okay. So I clinched around the chair with my hands and with my legs because I was so uncomfortable. And when I was becoming aware of that, I was like, hey, wait a minute. And then you relax it. And that is the point. When you relax your body, your mind and your emotion follows, because it is interlinked with each other. The body controls the mind, and the mind reinforces the body. And it's a loop. And you have to break it at one point. And the only point where you can break it is the body. And then you will become more confident, more calm, more charismatic. So this is, I believe, pretty much everything. So to wrap it up, work on your social competence, because when you are socially inept or socially insecure, you're not going to have strong frame, because frame is the exact opposite of insecurity. So you have to be confident, face your fears, learn body language, learn communication. Those are the cornerstones on how a man can improve his frame.
Amazing, yeah. And it doesn't have to be anything complicated either. Like, a good starting point would be just maintaining steady eye contact with people, smiling at strangers, that you pass in the grocery store. It's amazing how much smiling at a person can just influence their day. Especially
Absolutely.
if they're not having a good one and they have a total stranger walk by them and be like, "You seem like a pretty cool person." To have that boost of confidence. So, and that's definitely so true what you were saying about how you carry yourself influencing your state. One of the fastest ways that you can change how you think is to change your body. So, like, if you find yourself kind of like hunched over in a defensive state, the best thing you can do is put your shoulders back, sit up, get some air in. And like you said, that's one of those power postures that will naturally regulate your body and how you see the world. One of the things you mentioned a lot in that was, emotion, the role of it. From what I've seen, from what you've posted in the past and everything, you have a very negative view of, men being led by their emotions, putting them first, things like that. And I was wondering if you could go into that. I think on one of your posts, you even said emotions are worthless. So can you dive into that a little bit deeper with, the union of the body and the soul, how they interact, and then, how to really integrate emotion as a man? Because personally, I don't believe that it's necessarily a good thing to completely disregard your emotions, because just like how we have nerve endings in the body, I think emotions are how, our spirit communicates with us. But at the same time, I do absolutely agree that it's not a good thing for a man to be dominated by his emotions, to not have any impulse control or discipline or anything like that. So can you unpack that a little bit?
So first of all, let me correct something, because that's very crucial. It's not worthless, it's meaningless. Because, and let me explain why.
No,
you said,
you're
okay,
right. That was what you said.
Yeah, it was meaningless, not worthless. I mean, you can say they are synonymous, but I don't really see them as synonymous.
No, you're right.
When I say they're meaningless, and I say they're meaningless, is because they have the meaning we give to them. And if you truly understand that, that's so powerful that you can change your emotional state anytime. When I say, okay, emotions are meaningless and they have the meaning you give to them, that means it doesn't matter what you feel. You can feel sad and still do something else. And you can either fuel that emotion or you can transmute it. The power is yours. You are in
Mm.
full control of your emotional state. And this is the hill I will die on, because I used to be a person, I struggled with severe depression. I had suicidal thoughts, and I became a complete master over that area. So
Mm.
I am the proof that you can change your emotional state from being sad, from being depressed to being whatever. And it's, first of all, by not fueling that emotion. Like, what is the number one tip you give men when they are depressed? Do something.
Go to the gym. Yeah.
Exactly. Don't fuel that emotion, because what happens when men are depressed? Oh, I'm so depressed. I'm not in the mood to do anything. I'm so sad. They're fueling that emotion instead of making the change.
Mm.
And because they're fueling that emotion, it fuels the cycle. It's the typical depression cycle. You're depressed, that's why you don't do anything, and you're depressed because you're not doing anything. And to break that cycle, and it was for me, it was the same thing. Of course, I have bad days. Of course, I feel not very good on some days. I could feel better, right? I'm not waking up
Mm-hmm.
every day and thinking, it's the perfect day, right? I have days that are just fundamentally bad. But what differentiates
Mm-hmm.
me from the others is that I don't give it power. I recognize that emotion, and I'm asking myself, okay, why am I even feeling that way? I don't have any reason to feel that way. Let's say let's say you wake up and throughout the day you just feel sad for whatever reason. Okay, it doesn't matter. You have no reason to
Mm-hmm.
feel sad. Just analyze and be detached, be rational. An emotion
Mm-hmm.
comes and goes. They come in waves. You feel better, you feel worse. You feel better, you feel worse. And you can either fuel that emotion, or you can
Mm-hmm.
recognize it and say, okay, that's an emotion. That's energy moving through the body, because that's all it is.
Hmm. Yeah, and exactly like what you were saying about changing your body language. That's the exact same principle here, where you're giving yourself evidence and reasons to not be down on yourself, to not have those negative emotions, and then eventually, it's going to shift over into that. That's very interesting, and thank you for correcting me on the meaningless versus worthless, because those,
Sure,
like you
sure.
said,
Now,
they're
I do believe, because,
yeah.
sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Please go on.
No, by all means, go ahead.
I would just wanted to correct that, because especially
Mm-hmm.
emotions are a difficult topic. Because then
Mm-hmm.
men will watch this, think, oh, emotions are worthless, and they will start suppressing it. And that is the wrong way. That is the wrong approach.
Yeah. And I can say that for the listeners, I have a lot of personal experience with that. I had a good stretch of a couple years where I just like completely shut down my emotional state. I was like, one of these like hardcore rah rah guys you see on social media. Emotions don't mean anything. You're a man. What even are those? And then I got to the end of it, and I was just a nervous wreck, and I had to do a lot of work to move past that. So that's absolutely right. So what would you say is the proper way to integrate your emotions into your life as a man?
First of all, the first step is to, I'd say, disempower them. Like I said, not give them so much power over you. So that means
Mm-hmm.
when you're sad, it doesn't mean that you can't do anything. Essentially, not letting your emotions determine your actions. You don't have to identify with your emotions. You can acknowledge that emotion and still be yourself and still do whatever you have to do. Like, you don't have to identify with that emotional state. And that is the mistake that so many men do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just lost what is it called? The thread. What was the initial question? Can you repeat that, please?
Integrating emotion into your life as a man.
Exactly. Okay, now I know the other thing that I wanted to say. The other thing is to make time for them, actually. Again, with the time in solitude that I teach, it's the same with emotions. I say obligations first, emotions second. And an example for this is, like, I can tell this out of my own experience, giving you the example of my breakup that I had, which led me into all that self-improvement stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
was so depressed and heartbroken that I almost lost my job because I couldn't fulfill my duties. I couldn't do the work because I was so emotionally involved in it. And that is why I came up with, okay, obligations first, emotions second. You shouldn't be so emotionally involved that you can't do what you have to do. You still have
Mm.
to do what you have to do. So you have to put your emotions aside at that point but you have to get back to them at a later point. Because if you don't, you're suppressing them. And when you suppress them, they will come back with a lot of volatility later. So obligations first, emotions second. Let's say you're having a breakup. Let's take that example. You have your day, you go to work, you do normal. No time for emotions. Fuck emotions at that point. Doesn't matter. You have your obligations, you have to do what you have to do. But when you come home, you're free and you can do whatever you have to do or want to do. And then you allow yourself the time to process those emotions, feel those emotions if you have to feel them, grieve if you have to grieve, do whatever you want to feel. Allow yourself to heal it, give yourself the permission to feel it and to process them. And that second step is super, super important because, again, if you don't do it, it will come haunt you later in life.
Yeah, I once heard it a bit of an analogy where someone was saying it's like trying to hold a ping pong ball underwater, where you can do it with a few different ones, but if you put enough ping pong balls in the water, some of them are going to slip past your hands, and then it gets to be just uncontrollable. So, yeah, like you're saying, it's definitely important to do it in the proper context, but make sure that you are very deliberate about giving yourself time and space to process these things so that it doesn't, ultimately end up holding you back. So then if we can switch gears a little bit and talk about the, marriage and relationship side of things now. We've been going for quite a while already, and there's, we could do an entire separate podcast just on this topic and never run out of things to talk about because it's very complicated. But for the the first section here, the really obvious question, especially to people that aren't of a certain faith persuasion or maybe have just gone down the red pill rabbit hole, and they say, well, there's no point to getting married anymore. It's just a con by the state, and you're going to, she's gonna inevitably going to dump you and take your kids and half your net worth, and so it's much better to be an alpha male and just sleep around and be free and uncommitted. And you see all this stuff like hypergamy. There's no trust between men and women anymore. Like they're saying, it's like it's your significant other, whether you're a guy or a girl, isn't yours. It's just your turn, and all these different things. So why, in your opinion, is marriage even on the table? Why is it important to begin with?
Why is it? I mean, you have to think about from which angle you approach it. For a Christian, because we're biblical, because we're following the gospel, how it should be from our faith. If you're not a Christian, you have to approach it from a different angle because they don't care about the faith. But still, what I want, first of all, men to think about is all that negativity around marriage and all those thoughts that you just mentioned. It's not yours. She's not yours. It's just your turn. Just take a step back and ask yourself if those are your own thoughts or if those have been implanted into your mind by men who don't have your best interest at heart. And then ask yourself, okay, what is your true desire? What is it that you truly want? Because I do fundamentally believe this is contradictory to red pill teachings. Yes, okay, maybe men do have the tendency to have the desire to spread their seeds. But the contradiction to that is that men also have the desire to have a deep and emotional connection to a woman. Because everybody, I'm in this niche very, very deep, and I do have clients that struggle with that exact problem, with that red pill mindset, and then come to me because they actually want to have a relationship. So I know that this is actually the case. And I do believe that if you truly dig deep enough and ask yourself, okay, what is it that I actually want? And not something that I have learned because I got into something while I was heartbroken and very receptive to certain teachings. What is it that I want? Do I really want this lifestyle? Or do I want to have a marriage and a family? Because I do believe that we're built for family and for marriage.
Yeah. So then the question that naturally arises from that then is, let's say you have a guy who says, okay, well, that sounds great. I do want to get married, but there are no good women left.
You attract what you are. Do I have to say more?
No, I mean,
I mean,
that's a pretty good answer. So then how does one begin raising their level then in that case?
I do want to add something. How let me just quickly note that down, how he can raise this level, that I don't forget this.
I can ask again in a minute too.
Because,
that's fine.
I said, okay, you attract what you are. But I do have this with a lot of men in my coaching. Yes, there are good men. Yes, there are quote unquote high value. But they still struggle to attract a woman. I don't want to say struggle, because struggle is not the real term, but they don't have a woman right now and they're currently looking for it. And it may potentially take longer for them to find one. It doesn't mean just because you're a good man, because you're a virtuous man, because you're quote unquote high value, that women are just going to throw themselves at you. In fact, you can do that if you want to. I can say, I can guarantee you, I can get any man, doesn't matter, into a relationship within 1 day. I can do that. But now ask yourself, okay, what type of relationship is this then? I can go just to any woman that is completely desperate for any type of man and say, hey, look, I have a man for you. He's going to be in a relationship. And I can do the same thing with men as well. I can find a woman that is completely desperate to find just any man and get him into a relationship together. But it's not going to work. And he probably isn't going to be happy with that. So what we're doing is we're purposefully reducing the pool of potential, I don't want to say prospects, but that's a sales term. So potential wives that we can date, because that is going to ultimately benefit us. I always say, okay, you're a 1% man. So consequently, you need a 1% woman. And logically, a 1% woman is going to be a little bit harder to find. So you have to be patient. You have to be willing to stay virtuous and walk that path alone until you finally find that woman.
Yeah, no,
Is there
that's
anything
very
you want
true.
to add?
No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, needing to trust the process and just kind of do the best you can with what you have and let things sort themselves out, because you're definitely right. Trying to force a relationship is probably the best way to set it up for failure.
Exactly.
Yeah. So on the subject of, getting to that next level, would it be similar to what you were saying with, with shifting your state earlier, so just doing the basics, taking some actions, or do you have any specific steps that someone should take if they want to increase their worth?
The thing is, I have so many guys constantly asking myself, very young guys, and I love the fact that this is aimed towards young guys because they can learn so much from this right now. I have so many guys, 14, 15, 16, 17s, but even that extends to 22, 23 in my DMs, saying they want to be in a relationship. And 9 times out of 10, I'd advise them to not start looking for a wife right now, or not start looking for a girlfriend right now, because the problem with those men is the vast majority of them want to be in a relationship, not because they want to have or build that relationship, but because they are feeling lonely and they just want to have a wife or a companion. But this is not just the only thing. Just out of my own experience, I am engaged. Yes, I am getting married this year, but I can tell you, you have hell on earth. It's not easy. If I got to choose again, I mean, I wouldn't choose any different now, but if I were in that age back in the days, because I've been in there 7 years and I had my red pill phase, I had my casual dating phase, I'd throw out the window all of that. I wouldn't casually date. I wouldn't do anything of that. I would solely focus on building myself as a man. I just recently had a guy asking me, okay, I am 70 years old and I want to look for a relationship. And I said, no, don't look for a relationship. Because why do you want to look for a relationship? You're 17. If you focus on building yourself 5 years, you have hella business. You're probably self-employed with 22 then. Potentially even a millionaire if you do it the right way. So you have to be laser locked on your mission, on your purpose, and on your self-development, because preparation is the first phase of male initiation anyway. You have to understand it's always phases in a man's life. And there's an entire book about it. Absolutely love it. And you're nowhere close to marriage in that age. You want a wife, you want another wife, girlfriend in that age, but you want female companionship. And the reason 99% of men want it, because they feel lonely, because this is how the way it is in our society. But the right way, or the more productive and effective way, is to prepare yourself for that marriage. And then when you're ready, you find a wife. That means you have to be single for some time and focus on building yourself. And this is going to benefit you so much more than being in a relationship right now and trying to figure it out along the way. Because what happens when you're in a relationship right now, I just wrote a newsletter about this. You have an additional stressor. Just think about myself. I get up at 3 a.m. because otherwise I don't have enough time in order to connect with my fiance. So I have to wake up at 3 a.m., get the work done, so I have enough time. I do have additional costs, obviously, because you want to go on dates, you want to do that, you buy her presents. And if you're not in the position to do so, you're going to have hell on earth. Because now, let's say you're in a relationship, you're 19, okay? Then you go broke. For whatever reason, you tried a business, doesn't work out, okay? You're single, doesn't matter. You build a new business, no stress. You're in a relationship, it's really not a nice experience. So that is why I say, okay, just stay single. It's okay. You don't need to be in a relationship. Build yourself as a man. And when you have that, when you have the foundation, I'm not telling you that you have to be a 6-figure entrepreneur or anything, but you have to have stable finances. You have to be content with yourself and with your life. And you need to have some sort of direction where your life is going, where you want to be 5 to 10 years from now. And you have to have your purpose. If you have that foundation, good, you can find a wife now. Before that, just forget it.
Yeah. Going back to that idea of worthiness, you're absolutely right that a lot of guys will go and try to date because either that they're told that's, what makes them valuable as a man is the type of woman they can get, or they're trying to fill some kind of void or lack in their own lives with something else, which doesn't really work out. And you got me thinking back. So I am not financially in a position to propose yet, but I have been dating an amazing woman for a year and several months at this point. When we met, like I was not looking to be in a relationship. Things just lined up and it just made sense. And so I took a leap of faith, and now here we are. And things are just great. So can't complain on that front. So you're definitely right that part of it is just letting things happen as they will and just positioning yourself as best you can, because the thing that's worse than not having an opportunity is having an opportunity and not being ready to take it. And so that's very important. So one of the things you mentioned, I think even in your bio, part of the work you do is finding the woman of your dreams. This has been a very interesting idea for me personally, because on the one hand, you don't want to ever settle. You don't want to say, well, this person is good enough, because you're starting from the frame of already being discontented with that relationship. And then if you're stuck in it over time, that's just going to build up resentment and all sorts of things. On the other hand, you don't want to be unrealistic and have a standard for a woman that just doesn't exist. Like, accepting that women are human too. They're going to make mistakes. They're not necessarily going to be perfect. So what recommendations would you have for a guy that's, trying to figure out what is the woman of his dreams? How does he balance those two concepts?
I mean, I have to say, now you're forcing me to lay out my sales approach. Why do I say finding the woman of your dreams? I'm phrasing it in that way for a particular reason. Because when I say the woman of your dreams, every man has an image in his head. Every single man. Maybe she's blonde, maybe she's brunette, maybe she's a little bit more curvy, maybe she's more slim, but he has a picture in his mind, and that's why I'm saying that. I absolutely distance myself from the idea that there is the one. So actually the quote unquote woman of your dream, like I'm using that because I'm using visual language, not because I do believe, okay, there's that one woman, she's made for you, and if you don't get her, your life is over and you will never find any other woman. That is vanitas, like that is the soulmate.
That's very important.
And that is 100% not true. I do fundamentally believe that you build your wife. You don't find the perfect wife. And this is something that I do speak a lot on and try to get drilled into the men, that they are too focused on finding the perfect wife. They want this in a wife. They want this. She has to be this and this and this and this in the way. And it's simply, you can do that. Like if you think, okay, that's my approach. I am not quote unquote settling for less. Okay, you do you. But I can get you the woman that you actually want much faster and much more efficient because we build our wives. And if you find a woman who's willing to follow your lead, that's all you need. And that is what I want the guys to understand. And they also have to be realistic about their preferences and non-negotiables. You can have, let's say, you can say, okay, my wife has to have blonde hair. If that's really your non-negotiable, okay, again, you do you. I think that that's not true, because a brunette who's submissive, loving, who's caring, who supports you on your mission is just as good as a blonde. And that is what I try to get into men. You have to have your foundation. You have to know what you really need in a woman. That can be faith. That can be, again, there's no rule, but you have to be realistic. You have to be realistic and really think, okay, if really that woman is coming across and she has everything that I just listed in my non-negotiables, but not that one single thing, in that example, the blonde hair, would I reject her? You wouldn't. And that's the point of it. So you have to think about the traits that you really need in a wife, and you build from there on. And I can speak a lot from my own experience about building your wife, because every woman that you date is going to have some, I call them feminist tendencies, because the truth is, it is drilled into their heads since they are in school. So they do have like certain beliefs that are not really their own, but they just believe it because they think, they simply think that way. It's just like with us. You've been put into elementary school, things have been drilled into your head, and now you believe them. And that is why you have to be willing, okay, you have to listen, and you really have to, you need that discernment to think, okay, is she convinced from that? Or does she just say that because she doesn't know better? For example, pursuing a career. Okay, what do you want to do? Yeah, I want to have that job and do this and that. Is that really the case, or don't you just know anything else because there hasn't never been another option? And so you really need that discernment. You need to have an idea of what you really need in a wife, and then you build from on there. And that is super important. Like really, I want to emphasize on it. You have to build your wife.
Yeah. That's I'm referencing a lot of things I've heard in the past, but another saying was, you don't look for a palace or a cathedral, you look for level ground to build, which is very much in keeping with what you're saying. So in keeping with what you said earlier about, if you're a 1% man, you want to find a 1% woman. How do you balance, being realistic with your expectations and being clear with your non-negotiables with, having high standards, assuming that you are the kind of man that is able to, live up to that own standard themselves? Do you have any frameworks or recommendations for how to keep high standards without setting unattainable ones, if that makes sense?
In general, everything that is just purely visual is a preference. Anything that goes back to the character and the values and principle is a non-negotiable. So that's why I'm saying, okay, for example, in my honest opinion, I do have guys who say, okay, nationality matters. I can understand that. But I'm of the opinion that's not really a non-negotiable. For some men it is. But again, then I say, okay, if the perfect woman passes by that has every other trait, but she's not of that nationality, would you reject her? You really wouldn't. So it really, the non-negotiable part really comes down to values and principles. If she's blonde, if she has blue eyes, if she has that nationality, if she listens to this music, if she has those hobbies, if she likes to read, even if she's into self-improvement, all of that stuff, if you have like the same interests, that is something many guys get caught up on. Why I want to have the same interests? It really doesn't matter. Is she a good wife? Is she supporting? Is she submissive? Has she your best interest in heart? Can you rely on her? Is she a good mother of your children? Is she taking care of herself mentally, physically, and spiritually? Those are non-negotiables.
Gotcha, yeah. And it is definitely important to note that, what our non-negotiables are going to be, it's going to change from person to person. And like you said, there's maybe not like your soulmate or the one that you're like destined to meet and you're screwed if you don't. But there are a lot of quality men and women out there. And so it's a matter of just kind of positioning yourself. So to wrap things up here, because we are, we've gone for, I guess, a little bit over an hour at this point, to kind of, tie together everything that we've spoken about so far. So, frame, being a good man in a relationship, what to look for, finding your sense of worth and meaning. What, in your opinion, is the essence of masculinity? Like, what does it mean to be a man?
That's a difficult question, and I love that. We, again, have to approach it from different angles. As a Christian, we do have the masculine ideal with it, which is Jesus. And now we have to break it down for somebody who isn't a Christ follower. What is the ideal masculine man? I always say he's a balanced man, because that is what Jesus is. Jesus is the perfectly balanced man, as perfectly balanced as we will never be. He knows when to be, what is the right word? When to, using this story, whipping the other people.
So driving the money changers out of the temple.
Yeah, show that aggression. And he also knows when to be very tender. So it's all about perfect balance. You don't want to be too hardcore of anything. You want to be virtuous. That is very important. You want to have people's best interest in heart and not do any harm if you don't need to do harm, right? Again, it's about balance. If an intruder is in your home and he has a weapon, well, you have to do harm. But you're not doing harm purposefully. So you're being virtuous. That is what I would say is the perfect masculine man. He's balanced.
Awesome. Amazing stuff, brother. So people can find you at Holistic Manhood on Instagram. I'll have a link to that in the show notes, obviously. Do you have any other projects? You've got the 2 books, obviously, that people can check out also on your profile. Do you have any other, projects or pages or anything like that people can check out?
It's best if they just go onto my page on Instagram. This is where they will find everything. As I said, I'm in the game for quite some time now, so I do have many offerings. I do have, like you said, I have the books. I do have 3 different coaching programs. I do have 2 different coaching services. So if they want to know anything, if they really want to work with me, it's best if they just hit me up via DM and we will figure out what they need.
Sounds good. All right. Well, man, this has been a very interesting conversation. I've really appreciated, your perspective and picking your brain on all these different topics. I'm sure the audience got some value out of it too. So yeah, guys, I highly recommend go check out his page if you like this conversation, if you want to see, some more content like this. One of the things that I appreciate about the content that you make specifically is that you don't pull punches. You're not like coddling feelings. You're just like, hey, like, this is the way it is, how I see it. You can agree or disagree, but this is what I think. And I do really appreciate just that bluntness and that forthrightness. So yeah, thanks again so much for coming on, brother. It's been an honor to have you.
I appreciate you for inviting me in.
And that concludes episode 14 of the Operation Paragon podcast. You can find Manuel at Holistic Manhood on Instagram. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can DM Operation Paragon on Instagram or email operationparagonpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, remember that greatness is within your reach.